So I'll call the meeting into order here at 8:04 a.m. The School Committee Finance Subcommittee. We will start off by to the FY27 budget. I'll turn it over to.
Sure. So I'm glad we were able to hold this meeting today. The last time we met was the Wednesday before break. Our goal was to make sure that we got out the list of reductions and how we were going to meet the challenge of being about $1 million short with our budget for FY27. After discussing that list with the school committee at finance, and after getting some important emails and having some important conversations with folks over the last 2 weeks, it's really apparent that the way that those reductions fell on folks was hard for those families who were sending children to us with special needs every day, or our families of color. It felt disproportionate to that body of people that we want to make sure that we say out loud that we heard, that we will make some adjustments to the budget in order to address that feeling and impact on those students and on those families. So I wanted to kind of start with that because we always want to make sure that we're listening. We always want to make sure that we're acknowledging what our families are saying to us. So this will be repeated again tonight because I think it's going to be important to make some decisions today, but also make some acknowledgments. Again, we may have a bigger audience tonight. So with that said, over the week of vacation, I sent the school committee a list of data points that I want to make sure that we're all aware of, and kind of talk about the rationale for our reductions and that updated rationale for reductions as well that we have to think about moving forward. I also want to let folks know that we had a meeting with the elementary principals over February break, and we actually had meetings yesterday with all of our leadership team during the snow day remotely to talk about budget as well. So these have been ongoing discussions, and we expect these ongoing discussions to happen over the next several weeks before we come to a final decision about what the restorations will be and what the reductions will be, and also what the use of the funds that we get from the town will be used for in relation to operating versus reserve accounts, which I think is another discussion we want to talk about. So big picture, would like to start to talk about the issue of we have $1,049,000 worth of reductions to make. I met with Nick Milano, the town administrator, last week. The $500,000 for reserves and or for supporting the operating budget is still on the table, in his opinion, to be used by the school. So I think we should talk about that. And yesterday I received a text from the town administrator that the health insurance expense for next year is going to be reduced, which means there'll be more funds available for operating for next year. It has not been determined how those dollars will be put back into the budget from a town schools perspective, but it is money on the table that will be probably put in front of us as a school committee in a school department in a certain way to be utilized for next year as well. So we have flexibility to move some of our reductions around. We have some work to do around our thinking around reserve accounts versus operating. And that's kind of, I think, the basis of our conversation today. What do we want to revisit? What do we want to use for reserves? What do we want to use to reduce this list of reductions? And if we do receive more money due to the health insurance, how do we want to have that impact the budget as well? Again, wanted to start with the lead, make sure that people feel like your emails and your calls have been heard. We are revisiting the reductions in a way that makes more sense and has a broader impact and not just a targeted impact to folks who feel like that was a bit harder on their family. So the first thing I'd like to talk about with the group is the philosophy around, do we want to start with, if we have $500,000 of revenue that's dedicated to reserve accounts and or operating, I think it might be a good strategy, if people can differ, to come up with how much of that we want to use for both of those pockets of revenue needs. How much do we want to think about putting in circuit breaker, and how much do we want to leave to support the list of reductions and pull some things off that. I did provide a document to the school committee that Mark put on the table that shows the options for circuit breakers so the public can kind of get an understanding of what that means and what it looks like. Katie Blake is not here this morning. She is one of those people who went on a college visit with her child and got caught somewhere out of the state and is unable to be here today, this morning, but she will be here tonight. But just to give people a sense of how we want to approach circuit breaker and why it's important. We've come up with three different options. One is the current plan, and then we have an option one and an option two below. I want to put you to the right-hand corner of the box that says revenue sources. Every year we get revenue from our federal authorities. That's called IDEA money, which is about $1,300,000. We get early childhood funds. From the state, we get circuit breaker in Chapter 70. Circuit breaker is directly connected to reimbursing us for costs from last year due to special education costs, mostly out of district. And then we get local funds to support all that work. Katie does an amazing job of taking those three revenue sources and putting them together to expend throughout the course of the year in order to make sure that all those bills are paid. Any student who is out of district and any student that has deeper needs within the district that's reimbursed, we always want to make sure that we have the dollars available to do that. We also know that it's good practice to have at least 1 year's worth of circuit breaker, which would be in this case $3.5 million in your budget to plan the next year's budget with that in your accounts, because it's a very volatile line. And that's kind of what I've been bringing to the table this year. We started this year with $8,000 in this account because it had been depleted over the last 2 years, when that account should have somewhere between, in my opinion, $2.7 to $3.5 million. So we have dedicated ourselves to the school committee, the sub-finance committee, to kind of build that up over time. The question becomes, how fast do we need to build that up? What's the financial strategy around that, especially in the conditions now that we face, which are reductions in staff? When we were doing this work in the fall, we thought we were rolling over a 5.2% budget, and any kind of changes we'd make in staffing would be done around realignment of the existing level staffing model. Come January 7, when we realized we have to cut money, originally starting at 2.1 million down to now 1 million, we still need to have a discussion about how do we want to fulfill this obligation. These are bills that we have to pay. These revolving accounts are very important to the sustainability of our financial planning, which is our number one goal this year. So I thought we would talk about this a little bit because I think it's been on the minds of some of the warrant committee members and select board members and school committee. Because if we decide how we want to approach this, then the money that we have left over, or we can talk about it simultaneously, how much money do we want to put towards operating and how much money do we want to put towards this account? And how long will it take us to get to a sustainable level? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years? So that's the big picture discussion. Am I holding the attention of the folks online and the folks in the room with this lead in so far? Any questions?
Could I ask a question about that? As we're thinking about it, recognizing that bodies change, you were here on an interim basis. Does it make sense to have a policy, a guiding principle, whatever it is? Because to say our goal will be, or the school committee's policy is, and the school's policy is that we will carry X amount, a year's worth of circuit breaker year to year, as opposed to that, like, so that it doesn't become this fluid
Correct.
conversation, because it can be some districts do this, other districts do this. That's great. Like, what's our policy? How much we want to carry forward? So then if it is that we say a year, like have a year's worth moving forward, and then I think then that conversation becomes, what's the timeline for that? Again, I'm very conscious of the fact that that you are not here for the long term, right? And so there, I think having that policy and then having the thought process around how quickly we want to get there is important to establish now, so that it doesn't become a conversation every year and it doesn't become arbitrary. And so I don't know if that's even like a step further back in the sense of having this conversation.
No, I think it's a great conversation. I think what we said last week was, and Katie and I talked about this percentage, that we think that I would recommend working towards at least 75% of what your circuit breaker is for any given year. So that's the amount. So if we were using 3.1 during these discussions in the fall, because that was what our circuit breaker had been prior years. Now it's 3.5. I believe you should have at least 75% of your circuit breaker carried forward every year. And if that's a percentage that people agree to instead of an amount,
Yeah.
because the amount should be fluid with the amount that we're getting from the state. If we say 75% of $3.1 million was about 2.7, 75% of 3.5, which it actually is now, is probably a higher number. So I think we should look at it by percent, because that would be a good fluid in growing way to do that. And I do believe that we should get there over a period of time. We were trying to get the district there, as you can see, with the current 3-year plan target. We were trying to get to 2.8 by the end of FY28. And that's what you're seeing in front of you. So we would have, we started with $8,000. The reimbursement that we got in the fall, because we don't get that reimbursement until we're in the year. That's the problem. You don't get your reimbursement until you're already in the fiscal year. That's why you should budget as best you can the year before, because that number can change, that percentage can change, and it's not all guaranteed. We then would use 2.4 of it this year, and we would end this fiscal year with $1.1 million. We were proposing initially to then start the next year, as you can see on the screen, with FY27 at 1.1, and then we're flatlining the circuit breaker at 3.5 just for the exercise and the assumption for this discussion. And we would use 2.6 next year to increase the balance at the end of FY27 to about $2 million. The following year, the starting balance would be that $2 million. We would assume 3.5 in circuit breaker, which again is a flat number, and we'd spend 2.8 in order to get to that sweet spot of what we were looking for, which back then was 75% of roughly $3.1 million. So that was our original goal. We have 2 other options below that we can show that we could do it over the course of 4 years. And we can also do it in a way where the full circuit breaker is expended, which I would not recommend. So, and there's obviously iterations in between this that we can discuss as well. But I agree 100% that we should create guidelines and or a policy that makes this discussion not a discussion every year. There should be a fiscal system and policy that we have in place and adhere to, like the town has free cash policies, OPEB policies, and other policies related to their financial balance sheet as well. This just happens to be the one that impacts the schools greatly.
Yeah. Nathan?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of quick things. John, first, I just want to just thank you for your remarks at the beginning of this. I think it's important that people know we take their input very seriously as a public board. It's our responsibility to listen to community input and actually use it as data to inform our decisions. And so just appreciate that you're demonstrating that. And I think this full committee does that every day. Amanda, I agree with you. And, two things. I think this 4-year option 1, 4 years to target kind of model and goal is directionally where I'm comfortable. I think we should have a policy. In my mind, there's and maybe we should look at other districts' policies just to make sure we're covering our bases. But in my mind, a policy on this topic has 2 parts. One is, John, exactly what you said, a relative funding target, say 75% of annual expenditures. That way it's moving every year. And I wouldn't want a policy to tell us we have to be there at the expense of everything else. I think we need some flexibility. What I think the policy should have is mandating the committee to always have a plan and be working on a plan to fund to that target. And that gives us the flexibility to adjust our plans because the situation is always evolving. The amount of money we have to work with is evolving. Our expenses change. But it does force us to constantly be striving towards that target until we meet it.
Yeah.
Superintendent Phelan, sorry, just real quick, Mark, sorry. You had asked how to think about the $500,000 in free cash that could be coming our way. I think I don't have a strong opinion on like exactly how we use every source. I'm not sure how that works and what's on the other side of the ledger. But I do think just this option 1, 4 years to target is a good one. It seems like it would ask us to put $500,000 in circuit breaker. So that could be just be a quick way to channel those funds, leaving us a little bit more flexibility with the operating budget. And if we have a chance to continue to withdraw less from circuit breaker over the course of the year, I would want us to take advantage of that, all other things being equal. If Mark, go right ahead.
Yeah. Could I just address one thing that I don't think I said out loud that I just want to make sure folks understand is that if we use option one as an example, Nathan, and we do get down, and we always have to be flexible every year. This conversation should be held every year, not because we're redeciding the policy as much as we're evaluating the needs of the district and the needs of keeping pace. So that will always be a healthy conversation to have, but it shouldn't take more than 3 days or 3 meetings or 3 minutes to talk about. We should always be working in conjunction. And we give you, these numbers are available all year long. So that's one conversation. We should always be monitoring this as a yearly discussion about how much do we keep in operating and how much do we keep that balance. However, when we get to a healthy balance somewhere down in FY29, we can slowly pull back on that because there'll be more money available for operating once we reach the level that we need to have in place to feel comfortable. So then in FY29 and FY30 and 31, if we have an established balance and we're monitoring these funds well year to year, then we will have more money in operating by the nature of having the balance already funded. We won't be actively working to put money into that account. We actually have that account established. That's the second thing. Thirdly, I want to say out loud that the money that goes through this expenditure process, as we pointed out earlier, comes from federal money, local money, and state money. The local money has to be spent by June 30th of that year. So you can't put local money aside for the following year. That's not fiscally available to us. The federal dollars have to be spent by September of the next school year. So we have a couple of months to spend money for that federal money. The reason why we save the circuit breaker money as the targeted amount in the targeted cash flow is because the state lets you expend that money through the following fiscal year. So it comes with the greatest flexibility. So that's why we're using those funds to be able to hold for the following year, because it's the only one of the 3 revenue streams that you actually have a full year after to expend and do so in the best interest of the students that you serve. So I don't want to get too in the weeds, but we do have, again, we start with local money, federal money, and state money. The state money has the best flexibility. That's called circuit breaker. And that's why we use that term and that amount of money to hold back, because we do have flexibility to spend it over 2 years. And this should be a discussion every year to the point where we say, are we meeting that 75%? Do we have a healthy balance? Did these expenses go up dramatically? Is that circuit breaker reimbursement now $4.2 million? So we're overpacing ourselves. We're good. But that monitoring should be done every year. It's a healthy conversation to have. And I think that it will be a healthier conversation once we get the balance up to a point where we all feel comfortable that we have a mechanism and a sustainability for that funding cycle and expense cycle, that we no longer have to pay as much attention to it. It's always there for us to be able to lead it.
Can I ask a question then? So with respect to the 500,000 from the town, which bucket would that fall into with respect to when it needs to be spent? So if you put it into, if you put it into the, say it went into the,
it will go into the special education line of our local budget,
right,
and it will be expended first. And the number, so which would then correspondingly let us not use as much circuit breaker.
right.
So the circuit breaker number would look like it was staying high because we'd have to use that local money first.
And can you carry, and this might be something I should, but if say it went into a special education stabilization, does that, because it's a stabilization fund, can then that carry through?
At the town level?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that just stays in that account. That's like a separate bank account essentially
Right.
at the town level. Just like it.
so that can carry then, that doesn't,
That can carry, but remember, when we put that money there,
and it's not.
it has to be accessed under certain conditions,
Yes.
one-time exempt situations. It has to be voted by the school committee and the select board.
It's more restricted.
Yeah, I just didn't, I wanted to make sure I understood if that there were any of the time locations with that.
And what most districts do, well, districts do a lot of different things to get here and to try to maintain a fiscal responsible way to approach this work. some towns put an amount of that money in there just for the break the glass moment. And it just stays there, $500,000 forever. Because hopefully you're managing it on the school side and you don't need to crack that glass to grab those dollars in case something really big happens. So no one really contributes to that as much as they have a balance there. If you don't have a school district that's carrying their own circuit breakers, some budget, some towns have the town carry all of it. And that's just a different philosophy. So I think someone brought up the conversation with Wellesley, which I haven't looked into. Wellesley has the town carry all of that money in that account. So the school doesn't have to worry about the ins and outs. That's where all the circuit breaker is. They just fund this. They use the 3 funding sources just differently than I think we're using it. I am used to using it in the way that we're projecting on the screen. Katie's used to using it on the way that's projected on the screen. And if we do want to add, if we ever had extra free cash in any given year and all the other needs of the district and the town were in good shape, putting money into that separate account for that break the glass moment would be a good thing to do because it can be carried in a year.
I'll just say I totally agree with the point about policy. I'll say we started those discussions in December on revolving account policy in general, which included circuit breaker. The goal being this year, we want to set that policy, right? Because those were utilized in ways that we think should have required a little more oversight in past years. And so establishing that policy, both to make sure we fund these long term is good, and just make sure that the school committee has awareness and oversight of those accounts when we need to draw them down to kind of the levels we unfortunately needed to in the past. So I totally agree with that, and hope that once we get through the initial budget development, that is the next thing on the finance committee's kind of charge, I think, is to go back to that discussion, establish some proposed policies, and then bring back to the full school committee to discuss and hopefully vote on. In terms of the scenarios here, I think I agree with members who stated like option 1 here, which really I guess is option 2 if we think of the baseline as option 1. But yeah, this option 1 scenario would increase our utilization circuit breaker by 400,000, right? Because it's changing it from 2.6 million, which is the baseline, to 3 million. That still gets us to a good place in 4 years. And this does not include the 500,000 free cash, which would change these numbers even further.
Correct.
I think we should make a decision not expecting the free cash, because I think there's just been some statements from other boards around conditionalizing the free cash based upon exactly what we do. And so I think it's, to me, essentially a glass ball. Like, I'm not 100% sure if deciding option 1, if they'll still give us the 500 free cash or they won't. I'm not sure. So I guess my thought is the school committee should make a decision separate from the free cash, and then, still advocate for the select board that they provide the free cash to support the building of these reserves, as they kind of, the town administrator at least indicated he was interested in doing. But I agree. I think this gives us more flexibility within next year. It still provides us, from Katie's scenario, a robust balance after a 4-year period that gets us kind of close to that 75% mark. And then again, hopefully within 5 years, we get closer to maybe the 100% mark. But again, whether or not the 100% or the 75% is the goal, I think it's a future kind of conversation. But in either scenario, it kind of gets us there within the 4 to 5 years. I worry a bit about flexibility we have in future years with additional funding. Like, I think the funding constraints that the town has are things we're going to see in future years. And so I think we might need additional flexibility here to save positions in FY28, FY29. If we assume our circuit breaker reimbursement will go up, which is, again, Katie's kind of using a flat number here, I think is helpful, but I just would flag that gives us a little bit of additional flexibility in future years as we're thinking about how we build this up, to say, hey, we could increase our utilization FY28 to slightly more than 3 million because the circuit breaker reimbursement was went up by an extra 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is. So that's another thing that I like about this scenario is that it still provides us a bit more flexibility as we think about future budget challenges for the school department as well.
And I'm assuming that the discussion about we talked a lot about at this table during January. Let's try to shave down the impact on FY27, and let's start to really dig into this conversation about what the long-term outline is for the town and the schools for what the percentage increase can be. It certainly cannot survive on 3%. It needs to be more like 4 or above. The average, to Mark's point, at the last meeting that we had with the select board members present was between 5.5 and 4.5 seems to be where Massachusetts communities land with school budgets. I think what we're seeing as I read and talk to colleagues across the state is that a lot of people are starting to have to pull back some of the spending that they've had. Wellesley's reducing. You can look at some districts that traditionally have had high performing districts and are now pulling back a little bit because of budget constraints, and others that are really suffering a lot more, whether they're small rural districts in the western part of the state or Milton, Wellesley, and any other town that would be considered high achieving. And that is a worry of mine moving forward. And so with my task, when I met Lizzie in a coffee shop back in April or May, was fiscal sustainability. How do we make sure that we create systems where we're not doing this every year? And we didn't even think that this year would be the year that we had to start talking about it. We were really thinking that we had 2 or 3 years to begin to talk about how to restructure our budgeting so we had a good sound balance sheet for the next person to come in. And I think that continues to need to be a conversation on 2 sides. One side is encouraging and moving that percentage higher, that we do need more than 3% a year to make the schools work, because we operationally cannot continue to move forward without reductions if we don't. And also really think about how we're utilizing all of our staff and how well we need to create systems in order to have every single staff member we have be included into a system that works for kids. And right now we're in my 7 months in the district, I'm observing the need to revisit some of those systems to make sure that every resource we have goes to the classroom, is connected to kids to the classroom. And if we look at our philosophy, sustainability, and then tier 1 instruction, we are really trying to focus on the classroom first. And some of the reductions that we have proposed that I think that we should keep are reductions that connect to teachers, but not necessarily to students in the classroom. Support positions of teachers like the 504 person, that work can be redistributed. Some of the academic testing work, that work can be redistributed. But certainly the BCBA work is a concern because BCBAs are directly working with students in the classroom as well as being consultants. And if we want to change that system, we'll need some time to do that. So, and students shouldn't suffer while we're figuring it out. We should make the system first and make sure that whatever we want to do differently, we can do more thoughtfully over the course of the next year. So we are focusing on the classroom first. We are thinking about sustainability. And when I think about sustainability, I got a table from Amy Dexter that every town meeting we show what our increase in FTEs has been. And we have added 76 staff to the Milton Public Schools in the last 5 years. That's a lot of folks, and all of those folks are working hard. All of those folks have something to do. They're doing the best they can. But I couldn't say as your district superintendent that we as administrators have workflows and systems that make those roles as effective as possible for children. So we really need to assess all that while we assess what the fiscal sustainability can be, because that's where 3% and 4% of your budget increase intersects with how many staff you have and what kind of systems that you need to have in place for kids. So you can't talk about one without talking about the other over time. And Carla and I are dedicated to make kind of that recommendation at some point, either at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year, when you are getting ready to hire a new superintendent. What are some of the things that we feel are working? What are some of the things that we feel are works in progress, So then you can start thinking about your candidate in a way that has experience in certain parts of the educational leadership work that would highlight the things that are the needs of the district. That's our 2-month commitment to the district.
I think it'd be helpful if we had kind of agreement on if option one is our path, because then I think that helps inform the next step, which is going back to the kind of the reductions list and discussing how we further revise that before bringing that to the full school. Tonight, is there general agreement from not just finance members, but the other two school committee members are on the call, or other questions they have around kind of the option one as presented by John and Katie? Yes, Anna.
I appreciate the explanation and the rationale behind option one, so I'm comfortable with that. I think it does provide us the most flexibility. And I definitely don't want to get into option two. So I'm very comfortable with moving forward on that one.
Same. I guess I would just put a little asterisk next to my endorsement, which is that I agree with the principle of option one. I think I'm open to some fluidity on the exact numbers, just depending on whether titrating up or down $10,000 or $20,000 allows us to add back a position we'd really like to add back, or if it's like, hey, we can't do that, let's go ahead and add a little bit more into the revolving account. So just with that caveat, I'm in favor of recommending this to the school committee.
Totally agree with that caveat.
And this is Lizzie. I agree with what you just said, Nathan. I'm in that same place. And I'm happy there's school today, but I'm sorry that I can't participate more fully because I'm doing school drop-off. Sorry.
Okay. Tonight as well. Thank you for being here. All right. Well, with that, I think general agreement, understanding reductions list, reductions list.
So this document shows what we've highlighted within the reduction list, where depending on the amount of money that we choose to expend back on the list, the orange indicates what we would initially what we recommended at the beginning of the vacation week to put to take off the reduction list, which would be restore the DEIB director from 0.6 back to 1.0. Special educator at the middle school, and the 2 full BCBAs, and the English teacher. We did have a meeting with the elementary principals over break, as I had mentioned, in another full leadership team meeting yesterday during the snow day. And we do believe that the enrollment in the English department at the high school is something that we could probably put that reduction, keep that as a reduction, and maybe expend those dollars on something else we might want to bring back. So that could come off, that could go back onto the reduction list if needed. The special educator at the middle school, the role has a significantly low number of students it's impacting. So we discussed whether we start to use that and look at it differently for whatever high school need might be there, an elementary need that might be there. So we could always take that off the list and just repurpose it. If we took it off the list, it might not end at the middle school, it might end at the Tucker. It might end up being split between the high school and Tucker. So we would take it off the reduction list. And the BCBA discussion about not wanting to move faster than we have systems in place. The elementary principals understood the need to kind of restore the positions, as well as the middle school and high school principal. They think that the format that we put in place with just 4 is doable. That if we added a 5th, it might be helpful. So only reduce 1 instead of reducing 2. But this really resonated with our families. These individuals are really close to the students and families that they work with, especially in our subsequent programming. So, we could absolutely bring both of those positions back and do a more full, dive into what the systems look like and what that should be for next year. So we could, continue to think about taking both of those off the list at least one of them off the list for sure. So repurpose a special educator from the middle school. You think about BCBA's, either take one or both of those off the reduction list in the DEIB director. The English teacher, I think, can stay on the reduction list. And we also had some positions down below that we talked about as well. I'm not sure what people's appetite is. And the reason why I want to kind of get to a number is because I want to kind of put some parameters around how much did we want to, how many dollars did we want to put back into the mix of restoring positions as a way just to have a, perimeter around the conversation.
So right now, are you looking for feedback on the potential positions to add back?
Yes. So right now, if I could change that sheet, it would be, I would take off the list in orange. I would take off the list of DEIB director, restore them to full time. I would keep on the reduction list the English teacher. I would take off the list of special educator because we could use them at the Pierce or at another building, and I would take off the two BCBAs. So that would total, 56, 78, 156 would be somewhere around 285, 290, almost $300,000.
Still $100,000 less than the change discussed previously. Or, sorry, I was confused with BCBA. You would want to keep both BCBAs, not reduce that by one. We have
When I listen to the principals and the people who are doing the work, they could reduce one and feel like they're supported in the work and get done. When I listen to my families and say, my child really depends on the service, I would lean towards, pulling both off the list and then make that recommendation next year with a lot more study and a lot more thought. So it's easier to remove them both off the list and keep them and leave everybody as harmless as possible while we figure it out, as opposed to taking the chance of doing 2 or 1. So I'm hoping either way with 1 or 2, and that's the feedback that I got from the leadership team, and I'm just expressing that feedback from the leadership team.
I appreciate for 2 of them, I think for both, for the BCBAs, as well as I would say for the DEIB position, the conversation around systems and processes. I think with respect to the BCBAs, it sounds like it would be a shift in sort of the way that it's done. So I know that some is a consult model, some is a direct service model.
Correct.
And if we are moving, I think in some cases there will always be a component of a direct service model, but if we're moving more to that consult model, I think that takes time and teaching and sort of almost making others aware of an increase in their responsibilities to take that on. So I think having that time to do that is important. I think there's been a lot of conversation about the DEIB role and recognition that there have been several people in that role. And I think for me personally, recognizing that it could be a structural or a process issue and that work needs to be done to improve that and figure out ways to maybe tie it more to systems within the district, groups that are taking place within the district, and give that the opportunity with that kind of a fresh look would be important, as opposed to pulling it off or reducing it. I think by reducing it by 0.4, you sort of cut the legs off the position. And I don't know how you do that with a partial piece. And I think that there's some work that still needs to be done, but figuring out how to connect that, I think will be very important. So I agree with give time for the BCBAs and get to that place. I think what I'm hearing across the board on things is I think there are going to be bigger discussions in the coming year about process and structure and all of that, which I think is important, but I think that work needs to be done before. It's just my impression. So I would say, even if people say they're comfortable with the workload with 1, I would lean towards 2 and know that we've done the work to make sure that that reduction can happen. And there's some thought. Sorry, that was very long.
That's okay. I think it might be a good time to interject this conversation, which is in the fall and through before we start to have to work through potential reductions. And again, Carla and I are working as active interim folks as well as kind of consultants in the way that we're just trying to give everybody a higher level view of what's working, what's not, so we can leave the district with some systems in place, but also a map of what things need to be really addressed significantly over the course of the next few years. Obviously, the financial pieces are one that we've already addressed systems. We've already right-sized how we're working in terms of how we're accounting for all the money, which I think people were worried about before I arrived, and Katie's done a great job with that. But the two big areas that impact exactly what we're talking about right now for reductions is the district does not have a functioning MTSS process. And for folks watching this, MTSS is a DESE sanctioned process for identifying the needs of students, whether they're academic needs, therapeutic needs, or student learning, IEP student needs, and having a process that the district goes through where everybody's trained on how that worked, where you talk about children, talk about what they need, get the right people in the room. And then if it's a regular ed service delivery, like math intervention, then you would have it. If it's a mental health service delivery, you could get an adjustment counselor as part of a 504, or maybe part of an IEP, or maybe just as a service delivery for a child not on any kind of plan. But there's a system that everybody walks through, and that the school district in every school building is trained in the process. So there's data used, there's discussions held, there's questions asked, there's time periods where students get something different to see if it works, and then maybe you add something more. Maybe an intervention that's a regular ed intervention works for a child and they don't need to go on an IEP. So the MTSS process, I think, would really be the best thing the district could introduce over the next 3 years, to really put a system in place in order to identify all the different needs that kids have in all the different service deliveries that we would want to provide them. That would then inform what kind of staffing levels you need for each one of these positions in order to meet those needs. Because adding people without a system does not necessarily mean that it's impacting children in the way that you had intended when you hired that position. The second big chunk of work that we have to do in the district is the restorative justice, bias, and culturally responsive teaching work. I believe the district had done some of that work with leadership a few years ago, but they didn't do it with the full district. And again, that's a commitment of 2 or 3 years worth of professional development. That's every teacher, that's administrative assistants, it's Unit D, et cetera. Being really involved in hard discussions about race, access, culturally responsive teaching on the teaching end and curriculum, but also just people's awareness of how bias impacts teaching and learning for kids. And that's just not meeting with your principals and then putting it aside. That's actually embedded PD that I think everybody should really go through. And also all your new teachers coming on board should have some sort of a point of time where they have to take a course and be involved in that. And we're actually trying to add that to our contract negotiations. So those are 2 big chunks of work that the district should take on, because it actually speaks to some of these reductions, right? So if we have a better system of identifying the needs of students, then maybe that system would yield, maybe we only need 5 BCBAs after we've gone through that process, and et cetera. And so that will be part of the recommendations that we make to the district. And you would want to think about hiring someone who has experience in both of those areas, because I think that those are globally incredibly important professional development needs that the entire district would want to go through and become more aware of and experience those in order to have a better informed faculty and staff when we're addressing those needs. So that will be part of our recommendation moving forward.
Nathan?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Superintendent Phelan, thank you for kind of walking us through some big sort of strategy you mentioned MTSS and restorative justice work. So it's a big multi-year strategy that has to be thought through and executed. I just to read, I'll respond to that by responding to the potential add backs here. I think I agree with Amanda's comment on the DEIB role and the BCBA's. And I think it's even more true given what you just said. If we're anticipating that we need to develop and execute strategies related to MTSS and restorative justice, I think trying to hold back some of those resources now will give us more flexibility to be able to do that more effectively. I think I feel more. I think you mentioned you would probably not recommend adding back the high school English teacher, and maybe there's an option for the middle school sped teacher. I think I feel more ambivalent on those roles, and we kind of defer to you and Carla. I don't think we should go hunting for students to justify a role like the middle school sped teacher. So I think if there's a solid rationale for it and a need, and we feel like we can afford it, then okay. But I sort of defer to you on that. And I also just think it's important, if we're looking at just thinking of a couple of structural financial things here, if we're looking at potentially next year a 3 to 4% growth rate, and the year after that a 3 to 4% growth rate, number of these roles could be back on this spreadsheet next year. And the two BCBA roles, I don't know if it's these two, but there are two BCBA roles that were added, that were paid for with one-time funds that were baked into our permanent operating budget. The DEI role is paid for out of our bottom line. These are only hard choices at this stage. And I don't think that I just want everyone, and feel free to argue with me, other folks on the committee. I think it's important that everyone watching this now or tonight understands that we're finding a way to make this work this year, but it's not, there's like no promise for future years.
Lizzie?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity to appreciate what you were sharing, John, around the goals to strengthen MTSS and the importance of, as you had mentioned, building the systems, and others are affirming building the systems, including to support our work in DEIB. But going back to the beginning of the fall, when we were talking about goals, it's this recognition that, yes, I think we need to think about it both and. We need to preserve the capacity that is really dedicated to improving our outcomes around DEIB. That's the conversation we're having here now about the potential add backs on the reduction list, but also maintaining the focus on embedding that work across all leadership of the district. There's accountability for improvements on DEIB outcomes that belong to everybody on the leadership team, and ultimately to all educators and employees of the district. So I really just wanted to underscore and appreciate what you had said there, and to also take this opportunity to recognize something I really appreciate in the approach to the budget this year, which I think understandably there's been a lot of focus on the reductions because that's such a challenging element of this process. But the realignments that have also been proposed, I think, are so important. And for example, the way that you've proposed, creating that full-time director of HR position, that you've already taken the step, and the school committee has supported the step of creating a full-time assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction. These are not roles that Milton Public Schools has had, but we've recognized the need for it for years. So, these important shifts, I think, have not really gotten, to me, the attention they deserve in the conversation, because I see those two examples of these two positions as really, strengthening our capacity to support our DEIB work in important ways. While I do agree it's a good thing to maintain the position that directs a lot of the specific efforts to support, as you were just talking about, the PD and so on. But again, that's also work that a full-time assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction will have some ownership over. And when we had a person who split their time, half on HR, half on curriculum instruction, that capacity couldn't really be there. So, just wanting to appreciate the strategy through that lens as well.
Thank you. And also the adjustments and as well as the hiring backs. I think the MTSS work and the work around systems in the student support area by adding back the position that we did not fill of Assistant Director of Student Services, that's a big role that impacts student mental health, adjustment counselors, all the different types of support services that we're discussing that need improvement in systems. We need that position back so we can have administrative support to help set those systems up, to help facilitate that, as well as help support the teachers as we grow the PD for those things. And also putting back things like the team chair at the middle school, high school, which we reduced, continuing to support the Tucker with the added resources that we gave them this year and moving it into next year, not pulling them back, but making that part of their ongoing budget for grade level facilitators for all schools, and adding back 1.2 of their team chair as well. We are trying to think systems based, Lizzie. So thank you. And it does. I don't think our DEIB work should rest on any one person. It should be embedded. It should be institutionalized. But there needs to be accountability and checkpoints by somebody, and that's why that position is important. That's a cabinet level position that can have a higher view of the work that we're trying to do across a lot more folks.
Anna?
I do just want to echo what has been said already in terms of, the positions that we're thinking of, adding back, making full-time, and so on and so forth, as well as the thought that went into figuring out what makes most sense with our current budget constraints. I do also have concerns with what Nathan mentioned with using one-time funds to bring back these positions, and where would we be next year with that. But if there is a way to make it work, great. I support the positions that we're thinking of bringing back. I do want to make sure that, there is, if we are working on creating systems, that there is kind of a time frame and accountability that goes into it. I would hate to have positions, in that are not really showing results, and we kind of keep looking at the same data year over year. So I do want to see some movement in those areas and just positive outcomes. But I think overall this is great, but I would like to just kind of help. I would love to understand better what, when we're using this potential $500,000, how that would work for next year, and so on and so forth, for these one-time funds.
Anna, do you mean the $500,000 of free cash?
Yes.
So those are not proposed to go towards positions per se. That is funding that the town administrator has proposed. And again, it's not 100% clear if the select board, warrant committee support it fully, but that the town administrator has proposed giving to the school department in order to build up the circuit breaker reserves. Mm-hmm. So that's that. Those funds would not directly go towards supporting.
Okay. So then what about, how would we fund the positions that are currently in orange?
So we would increase the utilization of the circuit breaker funding from the baseline plan of the $2.6 million to kind of the $3 million. It's what we discussed in that first option. And that is recurring fund in that we get reimbursement from circuit breaker every year. Again, to John's point he made earlier, the exact reimbursement level is not known each year. Your reimbursement could go down because your expenses go down in the year. The reimbursement could go down or would go down if your expenses went down. So the exact figure of the reimbursement is not always known, but that's true for townwide revenue as well. We don't obviously always know what our townwide revenue would be, but it's still recurring revenue.
Okay, thank you.
I want to note too, though, to the point of one-time positions, of the list that we provided and we want to put on our website after we go through the meeting, 15 of the 75 positions that were hired over the last 5 or 6 years were originally hired with one-time funding. That doesn't mean that they all have to be the ones that automatically come back out. And it doesn't mean that the last position hired needs to be the first position to maybe be reduced over the next few years. But it certainly needs to be looked at as terms of we need to just reassess what the needs of the district are. And we need to acknowledge that adding 75 folks, 15 of whom were added with one-time money that have been absorbed, when that push comes to shove financially, we need to, we're slowly getting away from the fact that these were one-time positions because they've been embedded. It really will come down to over the next few fiscal years with, our work on the next budget next year, but more importantly, the work moving forward is of all the positions that we've added, which ones do we really need? Which ones fit into systems that work while we're trying to push that up against in what we can afford. So I wouldn't necessarily say if that BCBA was on one-time money, but it has to go. As much I'd say is, do we need that BCBA? And if we do, then we keep it, but it might have to be at the expense of something else over time, because now everything's embedded into your year-to-year operation budget. That might be where the district gets to, and I would predict that it will get to. I mean, we will be in the situation for the next few years where we may have less money than we have expenses, and we will need to make these hard choices over the next few years.
Other questions, comments folks have around the proposed changes to the reduction list, which again, I think, just to be clear, are remove this, the DIB director, and remove this, these 3 roles. Department with the department is showing, and then that is, as you all mentioned,
roughly $300,000.
Yeah, roughly $300,000. So that fits within our $400,000 kind of adjustment we made. Nathan.
Yeah, I don't know if this question can be answered in the meeting because I don't know if we have all the information yet, but I have a question that's sort of a variant of what Anna was asking, which is there's an assumption in this conversation that we will receive $500,000 in free cash to support special education reserve accounts in some way. I get that decision has not been made, and it's not clear exactly where, there's a couple of places that money could be channeled to, either the circuit breaker account or the special education stabilization fund. I guess I'm wondering how, okay, let's say that free cash does not become available. In what ways does this change our calculus and the roles we might add back? And if the free cash is available but doesn't go to circuit breaker but instead goes to stabilization fund, does that change our calculus in any way? Do you have an opinion on that, Mark?
I do. I think I was trying to say that when we were talking about the circuit breaker option, given the lack of clarity I have, at least in terms of how final that proposal is. And again, I think the town administrator has been clear that he supports this. It's just the other pieces, the other boards that ultimately need supported are the places where I'm getting kind of some more fuzzy messaging there or conditional messaging on that. My assumption is we make a decision based upon assuming we're not going to get those funds. And then if we get the funds, that's positive news. Those are one-time funds. So to me, it is the matter of like those are funds that could support the circuit breaker building up the balance. So if we got those, then at the end of next year, we wouldn't be at 1.7, we'd be at 2.2. And it again depends on if they can give it to us within the current operating budget or not, or again, if it, to your point, it goes in the special ed. So there's a lot of questions, but let's just say like holistically, we'd be at kind of 2.2 at the end of the 5-year period, we'd be at 3.2. So we'd be slightly above the 75% metric, we'd still be below the 100% metric. So to me, that's again, maybe that makes you feel like you could take out another 100,000, 200,000 out of circuit breaker next year. I still would feel more comfortable keeping this at the 400,000. I think also based upon hearing from the department of the positions that they're most intent on kind of bringing back, that kind of fits within that 400,000 metric. We still haven't talked about fee implications in that bottom part, but we still have some room. So I guess again, a long-winded way of saying like I would suggest we make a decision kind of separate from whether or not we get the 500,000, given it's not 100% clear if we will. And if we do, I think that gives us flexibility for FY 28 conversations based on this number now being kind of 2.2 versus exactly what it does for FY 27.
Okay, great. That actually does help a lot. Sorry, John.
Yeah, so for the average person watching this, what I think the way it's going to happen is Nick Milano has dedicated consistently that he's willing to give us $500,000 in one-time funding to support reserves. There's 4 different ways that can happen. So one of the ways is for him to have that money go into the reserve in fiscal 26 in order for it to be carried over into FY 27. That money, to Mark's point, would go right into the circuit breaker special education fund, which would then give the school department and the school committee the flexibility to maybe stretch our balance work over 4 years so we could maybe pull some money out that we wanted to support the operating budget. So the 500 is one-time funding. There's no other 500 coming back to us next year. But it gives us the flexibility to maybe not spend as much of our circuit breaker or expend some of it, as we're talking about today, on operating in order to support more positions remaining in the district. So it's a dotted line to helping us with the operating, but it has to go through a formal one-time funding into circuit breaker account that we would carry over for next year. But it gives us flexibility. Now we don't have to spend as much local money on circuit breaker next year. We can actually, to your point, Mark, take 300 or 400 and spend it on some of the positions that we want to carry forward and still maintain a pretty good 4-year goal of getting to that 2.7. So he has been very clear about how he wants to support both things. And I think the select board, the 2 members, have also been supportive of both because I think everybody's trying to do both at the same time, right? How do you build that up? We know it's important, but how do we shape down the list a little bit to make sure that we're not reducing as many folks in services to kids? So I think that will work, but I don't think it changes our strategy. I think that just helps our strategy, right? We can support the foundational account growing over time, and we can use some of those funds now with a little bit more confidence to support the operating budget and taking some folks off that balance sheet, off the reduction list. It's a good news story.
Thank you.
Can we, Anna, please.
Just had a quick question about the Director of Data and Analytics. I know we do see data presentations a few times a year, so I was just wondering in the interim, like how that would be handled.
Yeah, so we have 2 positions. One we're putting back. The Director of Technology will now be the Director of Technology and Data Analytics. The work that's done by that position currently just doing data will be absorbed into that new position. That is a restoration that we're making, and we're embedding that data analysis work into that role. We're hoping that also with that role, we're keeping, as you can see, a stipend for a lead teacher role in technology as well to pick up some of the work. So we're basically moving the work from that one position and embedding it into that former technology position. So we have data analytics, and we're relieving some of the pressure off the technology person by having a unit A person get a stipend of between $5,000 and $8,000 in order to carry out some of the work that position used to do. We want that position to be someone who is an educator, who not only understands teaching and learning and why technology is important for our teachers and our students, but also knows the data and how the data should be framed and how that looks and how it should be shared with the educators on an ongoing basis. So we think it's a natural fit. Our neighbors in Canton Public Schools have the same combining of service delivery there. That was one of our realignments that we were thinking of. Even if we did not have a budget crisis, we were going to realign that work anyway. So the data is important. It's embedded in one of our 5 priorities to use data to inform instruction. We want that data to be collected and supported by someone who can actually interpret it from a teaching and learning perspective, in a technology perspective. And we think that we'll be fully up and running and we won't miss a beat with that position being eliminated and embedded into the work of the new IT director and data analytics person.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
John, could we talk a little bit about, I know because we've had conversations and we received emails about the discussion around the director of nursing position and the idea of having a nurse lead and then possibly the addition to floating nurses, just sort of the rationale and the potential impact of that.
Sure. So when I arrived in June, we had one nurse director that was a Unit B position that was not student facing, 6 nurses, 1 in each building, and then 2 floats, which would go building to building when there were folks absent. We reduced one of those floats and went down to a 1 float throughout the district. We also had someone out on medical leave. So we were holding that other position in the budget because we had someone out on leave. What we're proposing is that we realign the positions so everybody's student facing. So a nurse lead would mean that they would take the administrative tasks on, but they'd also be responsible for seeing students every day. And that we actually created some funds in the budget line through a contracted service to be able to make sure that we had time for that person to be able to go to the other schools when needed. Ideally, I think we'd like to see a nurse lead be one of the 6 nurses in a building, and would actually like to go to 2 floats. Right now, we only have 1. And what that means is we'd like to be able to have partner nurses at every level of the district. Right now, we have the Cunningham and Collycott has 2 nurses in 1 office, and they can support each other. Would like to actually have one nurse at the Glover, 1 nurse at the Tucker, and because they have same times, we'd like to have one of the nurses dedicated to float between those 2 schools. So they have a 3-way partnership between supporting those 2 schools. And would like to have the other float be connected to the middle school and the high school so they have some connectivity to how they can support each other. I'm not convinced that having 7 right now I think 7 is adequate, meaning 1 in every building plus 1 float. I would definitely be open to thinking that if we had funding that we need to add a separate float to connect all the schools together, that we might need that next year. So I'm open to that idea as a potential putback. But I'm not fully convinced at this point in time that we need a director of nursing that doesn't see students as much as we need someone responsible for the administrative leadership of that team that can be done with a lead nurse model to a certain level in order to support the student-facing positions in a nursing office. So would I be interested in potentially adding a nurse throughout the year? Because if we're seeing our nurses stressed with caseload, then I would think about doing that and would want that flexibility. But I don't necessarily think it needs to be a director of nursing and another float. So I think ultimately 9 was too much, and I think 8 might be the number. And right now we have 7. So I think that's how we would be moving forward at this point in time.
Is that additional nurse an add back position, but a reallocation?
It's potentially a reallocation because we right now we know we're looking at that as a potential need and we want to build flexibility. And when we did not fill certain positions at the beginning of this year, it gave us flexibility to put things back as we needed to see them. So we added some lead teachers, we added portions of people's workflow, and we'd keep an eye on that if we needed to add that back next year. But it's not something, I mean, we can add it to the budget, or we can decide if we want to have any shifts, we can make that shift next year. I would rather have it roll out and see how it's working before I would add it back.
Anna?
I have to jump shortly, but I just wanted to say I really love the way you're explaining everything, John, because I think when there is a reduction list that comes out, I think it creates a lot of fear in the community. But the way you're explaining this and the way you're kind of looking at these positions and kind of seeing what makes sense, and then we can always have that flexibility. If we need it, we can add it back in. I think that that explanation is so important, because I think it does help calm everyone's fears the way you're doing it. And so I just appreciate the thought that has gone into this and the conversations that we're having this morning, because it really just helps. So it's like, when these lists come out and we might have to make these changes, it's really not just done to like cut positions, but we are trying to do our best to make sure that that the services, our students are being seen and our services are continuing, and there's no interruption in any of that, but also allowing us the flexibility to say, hey, this model no longer works. This might be better, and you can see better results in this format. So I really, really appreciate the explanation that you have provided in this conversation this morning. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And just to acknowledge that when you just get the list, there's no other interpretation you can make other than, hey, they're just cutting these things and there's no context here. So fully understand that when we had to put that meeting on the books for last week before break, our goal was to make sure that we talked to our staff and got this list up and running. We have a context document for every single position that we are looking to realign and potentially reduce, that we will put as part of the material on the website. So if folks don't watch this, they can actually read through that, and they can see what our rationale is behind every single reduction and every realignment in every position we're looking to put back. And there's some fluidity to that we want to maintain. But the public deserves the conversation that we're having right now to have tonight. They also deserve the context document that we'll put on the website so they can read through it at their own time. And this is to the best of our ability, realign resources where we can, make sure we're delivering the services to our students, making sure we have systems in place to support this, and be in line with whatever the revenue expectation and expense expectation we have to be to commit to. We don't do revenue. We have to respond to that. And for the public to watch, we are reducing other parts of the budget other than people. We have some non-salary based reductions that we're making, and we have some fee increases that we're making that are part of this discussion. So this isn't all about reducing just people. We have reduced other parts of our budget in order to make some of these realignments work and to soften the blow on reductions. And we're also be increasing fees, which I really, we talked about this last time. I think, Nathan, you said it out loud. It's not easy to do. I think that our community is like every other community, that they're paying more for things to store, and it's harder to make things work. Their taxes just went up, and then we're adding fees. So this is also, a struggle for folks to pay for athletics, add more money to the bus fee, and the rental that we charge for whatever we use for facilities will come back to the end user by paying more for travel basketball. So this is really a multifaceted approach that we're trying to make, but we should fully acknowledge that there's a lot of other moving parts that we're trying to put in place to broaden this work as well.
And we'll talk about fees more tonight when Katie's there.
Yep.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I do want to be mindful of time, just 9:18. Other portions of the budget presentation that folks want to ask questions. Okay, and we'll have a further conversation tonight at the full school committee. It's a question I have is, with the information that you've kind of shared here and the feedback you've gotten, it's likely too short a turnaround to change any of these documents for tonight in terms of removing the DIB director as a,
So we will work to have we'll work to put what we had up there today and then have a connected one that has it adjusted for what we talked about this morning and what we're recommending, and we can see some hard numbers. We'll put up I think having the full circuit breaker slide that we had today should stay, because I think it gives everybody the three options and why we're centering on option one to phase this out a little bit longer. And then, so we'll try to change the document that you just had up there with reductions to reflect what we talked about by tonight.
Okay.
We'll keep that one just in case we want to go back to it. And then we'll reflect a new one.
Good.
And
Yeah, I think
so that people can actually see it. And then we'll have the document of the rationale. We might want to put that up so people know what it looks like and let them know where they can find it if they want to read further for the rationales as well. I think, the goals for tonight will be like the goals for today. Acknowledge the impact that this had just as a list to people who just read it as a list and are responding in a way that it makes them concerned. Acknowledge that concern is out there, and we're looking to shift that. So we take that impact off a smaller amount of folks. Also, look at how we can readdress the budget to meet the needs of taking some of those things off the list, and then being cognizant of how we can be fiscally responsible where we are, and how we can draw out the circuit breaker over a period of 4 years to a period of 3, in order to give some more flexibility with the operating budget, and keeping in mind the longer term plan that there are some big systems and professional development work that needs to be done in the district in order to make sure that we're moving all of our resources in a way that makes sense for kids. And that those additional positions need to sit into, and those hardworking people need to be put into places where they can be as successful as possible and effective and efficient as possible for students that those systems might not be fully in place right now, that we want to kind of shore up and be really clear about. And having one more year to do that work would be super helpful before we leave.
any other? Just going through the agenda. I'll skip the budget coordination committee report. We did meet, but I'll just do that tonight. And discussion of fees, we'll talk about that tonight a bit. And then our next meeting is, we actually have a meeting tomorrow, tomorrow night with the warrant committee. You're not at, we'll save your evening. But so warrant committee, subcommittee, kind of school group, we'll update them. And then our next meeting is next week on the 4th. In terms of agenda, I guess my assumption is whatever kind of full committee feedback is tonight, we'll discuss that and kind of bring that back to the conversation next week. Maybe if there's time, we can continue that kind of policy, revolving accounts, which includes circuit breaker kind of policy discussion. But likely kind of mostly continuation of that FY27 budget next week. And then should also hold the week of for March 11th as well, just our weekly meetings for the next little bit. That makes sense, yeah.
Because then March 11th is the budget forum.
Correct.
Before this.
The annual budget.
Yes, yeah.
And there was discussion, and I was open to having a standalone meeting for with the PTOs to just talk about the budget. I actually would rather do that when we become a little bit more settled on where we might be.
Yeah.
And some of these positions have been reallocated and things taken off the list. That this might be so then when we get in front of the larger public, we can have a better understanding of where we're getting ready to settle. But that might be the goal was to give the public more of a chance to be involved and give input at that one time. And I was going to do that next Wednesday night, but I think it's important to have tonight's meeting and next Wednesday morning's meeting and maybe another school committee meeting before we actually do that.
Yeah, the issue is timing, because the warrant committee wants information for the last week of March, if not the warrant committee chair reached out, was hoping to have something final by the 16th of March. So again, all of this is just a timing issue. So I totally agree with you. I'd love to get in front of PTOs as like a wing with some family input before we have a finalized vote on the budget.
The budget, that's what the budget wants.
Yeah, we can expand the time for that maybe, and we can be more thoughtful about making sure we give space to people to talk. Having the night with the PTO is a little bit more fluid. It's a little bit more back and forth, and it's might be a little bit easier for folks to get a better sense of the context and the thinking as we're doing right now. Hopefully we'll do a little bit better tonight doing that again.
Yeah.
The forum will be another part of that we can do the following meeting. But if we think collectively that getting in front of folks that week or somewhere that week after the budget forum for another night, I just want to get back to the PTO presidents and let them know that we're thinking of that, and I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make the timing right.
I would strongly recommend we get in front of PTOs. I think going to where families are going to be rather than asking families to come to where we are is always kind of a better way in which to kind of get more feedback. When we're talking about the
Were
budget,
you talking about PTO presidents or were you talking about PTO?
No, the recommendation for the PTO presidents was to have one night at the high school where it's not a formal school committee meeting.
Yes.
So it can just be at least a little bit more of a more fluid conversation.
Yes.
And we wouldn't be meeting them in their buildings as much as they'd have to come to the high school.
Yeah.
But at least collectively, they would be getting their constituents out at their own individual buildings to come up and be part of the meeting. To hear the explanation. So I feel very comfortable doing that. I think if it helps, it helps. That's the whole goal. I was just trying to fit it into the window.
yeah, no, totally agree. Okay.
When do we need, so in talking to Lizzie, typically we would have the budget forum, the night of the budget forum, is that when we would vote on the budget?
That's what we've done in the past, but that's like always felt like terrible practice. Like,
You
you're
already
asking for
voted.
feedback and we're just gonna vote on it.
right.
So
Doesn't
then-
feel
That's what we've done last.
So then if some, I guess I'm just trying to figure out timing, so if we meet March 11th and then the next meeting is what, the 25th? School committee meeting, would that be the point at which we would?
I-
Try to.
I think so, if not like trying to
Or try to
have,
get a meeting in.
trying to have a meeting in between
60.
just for the purpose of voting on the budget.
Yes, you could do that on the 18th.
Yeah, if we could have the public, yeah, I really have despised like
Yeah.
having the vote the same night as the public, because there's
Yeah.
no way to incorporate the
Yeah.
comment.
Right.
So we have that on the 11th. Try and have this meeting with organized with the PTOs sometime next week or the week of the 9th. So that essentially get kind of like that's 2 weeks of trying to get public input, depending upon, I mean, I was glad we had a majority of the school committee here
Mhm.
to see some of that, and hopefully tonight we have some general agreement, not again a finalized vote, but general agreement on the direction we're going, so we can share that, get any additional feedback from community members. On the 11th, I would recommend maybe we meet with try and have that PTO meeting before the 11th, so that on the 11th at that school committee meeting, we can debrief whatever feedback we get from
Mhm.
PTO and whatever feedback we get within that meeting, public presentation. And then, it might be that then we need to have kind of a special meeting on the 18th if possible, or another day that we just to vote and finalize, and then we can send that to the warrant committee.
We could talk about that too. Make sure.
Yeah, and again, I think we'll take what we have right now and share that update with the warrant committee as kind of a fluid process or the subcommittee at least. So hopefully they won't be too
Okay.
taken off guard. But yeah, ultimately need the full committee to vote on it.
I have a tentative, I held the 4th open for that PTO meeting just as a placeholder. On the 18th, which we're only talking Wednesdays now. We also have grade 1 night. So we don't want to have a conflict with that, but that doesn't mean we can't meet on a Tuesday or a Thursday or whatever we need to as a full body or to do this some other time. There's just a lot of nights that are starting to build up, and I just want to make sure that we get it in there. So we're all on the same page that we'd like to get in front of the public in a more direct way before the final decisions are made, and we'll try to work out a calendar tonight to talk about that. And people do have the right to come to the public speak part of the meeting tonight, and also the budget forum the following week. We're just trying to add another layer of openness, feedback, and listening, if we can.
Great. Any other thoughts, questions?
Other from me.
We'll be back at it then tonight. So with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Cesar? Great. All in favor, we'll do a roll call vote. Nathan?
Yep.
Amanda?
Yeah.
I am a yes. You're adjourned. Thank y'all.
Thank you, everyone. See you tonight.